She looked him in the eye, hit the launch override, and left him to die. He was just a human escort stranded on a dead rock with 36 elite assassins closing in. Princess Valerie thought she was making the hard, necessary choice of a ruler. She thought she would just have to learn to live with his ghost. But when she returned 6 months later to recover his bones, she didn't find a grave. She found a mountain of corpses, and a human who simply refused to die. The air in the extraction bunker tasted like copper and burnt ozone. Cole slammed his shoulder against the heavy bulkhead door, hauling the locking lever down just as a plasma bolt chewed through the outer frame. Slag dripped onto the grated floor, glowing angry orange in the dim emergency lighting. He backed away, chest heaving, his ballistic vest scorched and reeking of melted Kevlar. They're through the perimeter. Cole's voice was remarkably flat for a man with a shattered collarbone. He spat a wad of blood onto the floor and ejected the spent thermal magazine from his rifle. Across the room, huddled by the sole remaining escape pod, sat Valerie. She was royalty, born to a lineage that spanned 12 star systems, draped in silks that were now torn and stained with soot. She was shaking, not from the cold of the dead mining moon of Grimstone, but from the terrifying, undeniable reality of their situation. The royal guard was gone. Her retainers were dead. There was only Cole, a contracted human mercenary from a backwater death world, hired to carry luggage and look intimidating. "How many?" Valerie asked, her voice cracking. 30, maybe 35. Cole slapped a fresh magazine into his rifle and racked the bolt. "Wraiths. Best in the business. The Syndicate didn't cheap out on your assassination, Princess." Valerie looked at the escape pod. It was a single occupancy unit, a glorified bullet designed to shoot one high-value target into orbit, where a distress beacon could reach the planetary blockade. One seat, one harness. Cole saw her looking. He didn't say anything. He just pulled a medical stapler from his thigh rig and blindly pressed it to the gash on his forearm. He squeezed the trigger twice. Valerie flinched at the mechanical clack-clack. Cole didn't make a sound. "The pod," Valerie whispered. "Is prepped," Cole said. He limped over to the console, tapping the cracked display. "I locked in the trajectory. You'll punch straight through the exosphere right into the patrol lanes of the Third Fleet. You'll be drinking synthetic wine on a dreadnought in 3 hours." Valerie stared at his broad back. "It only holds one." Cole stopped typing. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his expression was unreadable. It wasn't brave. It wasn't fearful. It was just tired. "I know." "Cole, Save it, Princess." Cole stepped away from the console and moved toward the choke point facing the bunker door. He started pulling high explosive charges from his pack, slapping them onto the load-bearing pillars. "You're the heir to the throne. I'm a guy getting paid 200 credits a cycle to shoot things." The math isn't complicated. The bunker shook as a heavy concussion charge detonated outside. Dust rained down. The wraiths were breaching the outer courtyard. They moved like shadows clad in optical camouflage, wielding thermal blades that could cut through dreadnought plating. "Get in the pod, Valerie." It was the first time he had used her actual name. Valerie stood up. Her political tutors had taught her that the lives of commoners, of aliens, of mercenaries, were currencies to be spent for the preservation of the state. She was the state. It was a cold calculus that made perfect sense in the lecture halls of the High Spire. Here, looking at a man rigging himself to die so she could live, the calculus felt like a crime. She stepped into the cramped pod. The harness automatically engaged, strapping her tightly to the gel seat. Cole walked up to the glass and pressed his hand against the console, initiating the launch sequence. The pod hummed to life. "I won't forget this," Valerie said, tears finally spilling over, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "I will tell the galaxy what you did." Cole gave a half smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Just tell them to send my back pay to my sister in Chicago." He hit the override. The glass door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Valerie screamed his name, but the sound dampeners killed the noise instantly. Through the thick glass, she watched Cole turn his back to her. He picked up his rifle, kicked a metal crate over for cover, and raised his weapon toward the melting bunker door. He didn't look back. The pod launched. Gravity crushed Valerie against her seat as she was fired into the black sky. Below her, the mining facility shrank into a gray smudge against the desolate landscape of Grimstone. A tiny flash of orange light bloomed near the bunker, then another, then nothing. Valerie squeezed her eyes shut. She was alive. She had made the right choice. She told herself that until the rescue tractors of the Third Fleet pulled her aboard. She told herself that until she believed it. The high spire of the capital world was a marvel of engineering, a needle of white marble and plasteel piercing the clouds. It was quiet. It was safe. It was suffocating. Valerie sat at the edge of her massive silk-draped bed, staring at her hands. They were perfectly manicured now. The dirt of Grimstone had been scrubbed away by autodocs, the minor cuts healed by dermal regenerators. She looked entirely unbroken. "You did what had to be done." Garrison's voice came from the doorway. He was her chief advisor, a tall, impeccably dressed statesman who moved with the grace of a predator. He stepped into the room holding an etched data pad. "The syndicate's attempt on your life failed. The ruling council is furious, but they are rallying behind you. The political capital we've gained from this assassination attempt is unprecedented." Valerie didn't look up. 30 Wraiths, Garrison. They sent their best, and they failed. Because you were decisive. Because a human stayed behind to catch their blades. Valerie corrected, her voice hollow. Garrison sighed. The mercenary performed his contractual duties admirably. "We have authorized a generous compensation package to his listed next of kin, 2 million credits. His family will never work another day in their lives." His name was Cole. "His name is irrelevant now, Valerie. You are the future of the Empire. He was a temporary asset. You need to stop dwelling on this. You survived. Be glad." Valerie finally looked at him. The sheer pragmatism in Garrison's eyes made her stomach turn. He didn't understand. None of them did. They hadn't smelled the melting slag. They hadn't seen the tired resignation in a man's eyes as he locked himself in a tomb. Months passed. Valerie resumed her duties. She smiled at galas, signed trade agreements, and shook hands with diplomats, but when the lights went out, she was back in the bunker. She heard the clack-clack of the medical stapler. She saw Cole's broad back turn to her, facing an impossible wave of killers. The guilt didn't fade. It festered. Humanity was a young species, viewed as brutish and expendable, hired as muscle and shock troops, bleeding for empires that couldn't care less about them. Valerie had perpetuated that cycle. She had spent a human life to buy her own. 6 months after the incident on Grimstone, Valerie called a closed-door meeting with the captain of her personal royal guard, a seasoned veteran named Hayes. "We are going back to Grimstone," Valerie stated, sliding a star chart across the hollow table. Hayes, a stocky man with a face like weathered stone, frowned. "Respectfully, Princess, there is nothing on that rock but toxic dust and abandoned mines." "There is a body," Valerie said. "A human." Hayes blinked. "The Escort, Princess. With all due respect, if 30 Syndicate Wraiths breach that bunker, there isn't a body left to recover. Wraiths take trophies. They burn what they don't take." "I don't care." Valerie's voice carried the absolute authority of the crown. "We are going back. I need to bring his dog tags back, or his bones, or whatever is left of him. We leave in 4 hours, under the guise of a deep space inspection. Prep your best men." Hayes knew better than to argue with that tone. "Yes, Your Highness." When the royal dropship detached from the cruiser in Grimstone's orbit, Valerie stood by the viewport. The planet looked just as dead as she remembered. A gray, scarred sphere floating in the void. She was returning to the scene of her greatest shame. She was returning to face the ghost she had created. The dropship touched down a click from the mining relay, kicking up a cloud of gray, acidic dust. Hayes led a 12-man squad down into the howling wind. Valerie followed in an environmental suit, her visor polarizing against the glare of Grimstone's distant sun. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley where the bunker sat, Hayes signaled for the squad to halt and raised his macro binoculars. "Movement?" a guard asked over the comms. "No," Hayes replied, his voice tense. "No movement, but something's wrong with the terrain." Valerie pushed past the guards to the ridgeline. She looked down at the courtyard leading to the bunker. She stopped breathing. It wasn't a clean ruin. The syndicate didn't just breach the door and leave. The courtyard was unrecognizable. "What in the hell is that?" a guard muttered. Scattered across the approach were craters, dozens of them. The ground was scorched black and stained with heavy streaks of dried luminescent blue, the blood of the wraiths. But it was the center of the courtyard that drew the eye. A barricade had been built, roughly 10 feet high, curving in a semicircle around the blasted entrance. It wasn't made of stone, it was made of armor. Black stealth-weave chest plates, shattered helmets with their visors punched out, severed limbs still encased in tactical gear, stacked like grim cordwood. A mountain of dead assassins, piled methodically to form a defensive wall. Valerie felt her knees weaken. Hayes! Weapons hot, Hayes barked, sweeping his plasma rifle across the dead valley. Check your corners. Watch for traps. They descended into the courtyard. The smell hit them even through the environmental filters. A sickening cocktail of rotting flesh, rusted metal, and dried blood. As they got closer to the macabre monument, the details became horrifyingly clear. These wraiths hadn't just been shot, they had been dismantled. Valerie saw one helmet impaled on a rusted piece of rebar, a crude warning sign. She saw a wraith torso missing its power pack, the exposed wiring ripped out and repurposed. "Captain," a guard called from the left flank, pointing his rifle at the ground. "Tripwire." Hayes jogged over, kneeling beside a thin, barely visible synthetic thread strung between two rocks. He traced it back to a cluster of unexploded syndicate thermal grenades wired together with the gutted power cord of a wraith suit. "Improvised explosive," Hayes whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Military grade. Whoever rigged this knew exactly what they were doing." "The wraiths wouldn't booby-trap their own dead," Valerie said, staring at the mountain of bodies. "No," Hayes agreed slowly, backing away from the wire. "They wouldn't. Wraiths strike, kill, and vanish. This is a siege defense. This is someone digging in." Valerie's heart began to hammer. Cole. She bypassed Hayes and walked toward the entrance, stepping carefully over the severed arm of a wraith. The heavy bulkhead door had been blasted off its hinges. "Cole," Valerie yelled, her voice echoing through the external speakers of her suit. Silence. Just the howling wind. "Princess, step back," Hayes ordered, motioning for two guards to take point. They moved into the darkness of the bunker, plasma rifles cutting through the gloom. Valerie followed them inside. The interior was a charnel house. More bodies. Syndicate assassins lay in twisted heaps in the narrow corridors, the walls painted with blast marks and alien blood. They reached the main extraction room where Valerie had boarded the pod. The console was smashed. In the center sat a pile of metal crates arranged in a circular redoubt, the floor carpeted in thousands of spent brass casings, a glittering sea of human ammunition, and slouched on the highest crate against a load-bearing pillar was a figure. Valerie gasped, rushing forward. It was Cole. His ballistic vest was gone, replaced by pieces of wraith armor strapped across his chest with heavy-duty tape. His face was a mask of dirt, dried blood, and a thick, ragged beard. He looked like a feral, cornered animal. Across his lap lay a heavy syndicate plasma repeater, its power cable running to a jury-rigged battery pack scavenged from the dead. His eyes were closed. Valerie fell to her knees beside the crates, tears blurring her vision, and reached out to touch his boot. "Cole," she sobbed, the guilt finally breaking her. "Cole, I'm so sorry." The heavy plasma repeater suddenly shifted. Before Hayes or the guards could even raise their weapons, Cole's eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot, hollow, and fiercely, terrifyingly alive. In a fraction of a second, the barrel of the alien weapon was pointed directly at the center of Hayes's chest. Cole didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His voice, when it came, was a raspy, dehydrated gravel. "You're late." Hayes froze. The 12 Royal Guards kept their plasma rifles leveled, but their aim wavered. They were staring at a ghost who had just outmaneuvered them. The jury-rigged battery pack sputtered with dangerous, audible instability. Valerie raised her hands and stepped deliberately between the barrel of the alien weapon and her captain. "Stand down, Hayes," she ordered, her voice trembling but firm. "Lower your weapons, all of you." "Princess, he is hostile," Hayes argued, his eyes locked on Cole's finger resting on the trigger. "He is heavily armed and erratic." "I said lower them." Reluctantly, the guards lowered their rifles. Cole watched them do it, processing the movement with a slow, mechanical detachment. Once the last barrel pointed at the floor, Cole exhaled. The tension left his body all at once. The plasma repeater slipped from his grip, clattering against the crates. He slumped backward against the pillar, his eyes sliding shut. "Water," he muttered. Valerie tore the emergency canteen from her suit's webbing and pressed the nozzle to his cracked lips. He drank greedily, coughing violently. His left leg was splinted with the casing of a thermal grenade launcher, held together by melted wiring and strips of uniform. "Get the medics down here," Valerie shouted. "Now." Hayes barked urgent orders into his comms, then nudged the plasma repeater with his boot. He wired a syndicate power cord directly to the ignition chamber. One wrong squeeze and this thing would have vaporized him along with us. "But it didn't," Valerie said, wiping a smear of dirt from Cole's cheek. He flinched away from the touch. "How long has he been out of rations?" Hayes asked. "There were 3 days of emergency supplies in the bunker," Valerie replied softly. "That was 6 months ago." Cole opened his eyes. They tracked Hayes first, then settled on Valerie. There was no warmth in them. "The water recyclers," Cole rasped, pointing a shaking finger toward the far corner. "Smashed them, built a condensation trap off the underground thermal vents." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Food was complicated. Valerie did not ask. She looked out toward the courtyard, picturing the stacked bodies, and forced down a surge of nausea. The medical team arrived, swarming the bunker. When they removed the black chest plate, Valerie gasped. His torso was a horrific canvas of bruising, overlaid with crude, self-inflicted stitches made from copper wire. Severe malnutrition, profound dehydration, multiple microfractures. The lead medic rattled off in disbelief. His body is consuming its own muscle tissue just to keep his organs functioning. He should be in an irreversible coma. "He is stubborn," Valerie said. They loaded him onto a stretcher. Cole did not resist the straps. As they crossed the courtyard, the stretcher bearers slowed, navigating the labyrinth of craters and dead assassins. Cole turned his head weakly and looked at the mountain of armor and bone he had built. "Counted 32, he whispered. Valerie leaned in closer. "What? 32 wraiths? You said there were 30 or 35. "I got 32. I waited for the rest." They never came. He had built the wall not just for defense but as a ledger, a physical tally of the killers he had dismantled, waiting patiently for the math to balance. In the sterile medical bay, Cole was strapped to a biobed, IV lines pumping nutrient fluids into his emaciated arms. Valerie sat in the metal chair beside the bed, changed back into her royal silks, though the fine fabric felt suffocating against her skin. "Why did you come back?" Cole asked, his voice marginally stronger now but still terrifyingly flat. "To bring you home," Valerie said. Cole scoffed. "You came back for a corpse. You wanted to bury me to make yourself feel better." The truth of it stung, but Valerie did not deny it. "I thought you were dead. Anyone else would be dead. I am human. We do not die just because the odds are bad." He turned his head away. "We die when we run out of ammo. I had exactly 3 rounds left." Valerie looked at his hands, the knuckles permanently scarred and swollen. "I will make this right, Cole. You will never have to fight again." Cole closed his eyes slowly. "I never stopped fighting. Even when they stopped coming, I fought the silence." He drifted off, the sedatives pulling him under. Valerie watched his chest rise and fall. She had saved his physical life, but she had absolutely no idea how to save his soul. For 3 days, Valerie barely left the medical bay. Sometimes Cole woke up screaming, thrashing against the restraints until the staff injected tranquilizers. He only drank water, measuring every sip as if the supply might vanish. The guilt Valerie felt transformed from the sharp pain of a singular betrayal into a dull, constant ache. She had left a man behind and retrieved a loaded weapon. The landing at the high spire was not quiet. Garrison stood rigidly on the landing pad, expecting Valerie to return holding a small, quiet urn. Instead, a team of medics wheeled out a mobile biobed strapped with a feral, emaciated human, with eyes like dead coals. Valerie walked closely behind, her chin held high in defiance. "Your Highness, this is highly irregular," Garrison said. "The Council was informed you were inspecting deep space relays. The inspection yielded unexpected results, Garrison. Have the West Wing prepared." "I want a full medical team on standby." Garrison looked at Cole. For a terrifying second, the human's eyes snapped into focus, locking onto him with the predatory intensity of a starving wolf. Garrison took an involuntary step back. "Princess, he is a mercenary. You cannot bring him into the royal residence." The syndicate still has deep cover spies within the capital. If they discover he survived, they will know exactly what happens to those who dare cross me. Valerie snapped. He stays with me. They moved Cole into a sprawling suite, overlooking the lower atmospheric cities, featuring a floor-to-ceiling viewport. It was the worst possible place for him. When the medics transferred him to the silk bed, Cole immediately rolled off, hit the floor, and crawled into the darkest corner, putting his back against the solid plascrete wall. "Cole, please," Valerie said, stepping forward with her hands raised. "Too open," Cole muttered, his eyes darting across the room, cataloging the windows and the double doors. Too many angles, snipers, breach points. He pulled his knees to his chest. He looked ridiculous, a broken man cowering in a room designed for kings, but his fear was absolute. He was still physically on Grimstone. Valerie dismissed the medical staff. When the doors sealed, she walked to the corner and sat directly on the floor opposite him, not crowding him, ruining her priceless silk dress. "There are no snipers here," she said quietly. "You are protected." "Armor," Cole demanded, his voice thick with panic. "Where is the armor?" "You do not need it." Cole laughed, a harsh scraping sound devoid of humor. "That is exactly what the captain of the guard said right before the wraiths cut his throat. We have a perimeter. We are safe. No one is safe. Ever." The next few weeks were a grueling battle of attrition. Valerie abandoned her political duties, delegating them to Garrison, and focused on Cole. The physical recovery was astonishingly fast. Within a month, his broad shoulders returned, the bruises faded, and his limp reduced to a slight drag of his left foot. The psychological recovery, however, was non-existent. He refused the bed, sleeping on the floor of the walk-in closet. He dismantled the room's climate control panel and used the wiring to build a tripwire across the entrance. The first time a servant triggered it, the shock threw the man across the corridor. Valerie banned all staff from the wing and brought him his meals herself. He would inspect every plate, prodding the food before eating it with joyless efficiency. One evening, as heavy rain lashed against the viewport, Valerie found him standing by the glass, staring down at the glowing city lights. He looked healthy now, the feral beard trimmed to sharp stubble, but his posture remained rigid. "They do not know," Cole said softly, pointing down at the sprawling city. "Millions of them, living safely in little boxes. They honestly think the walls keep the dark out." "They are safe, Cole. We have the fleet. We have the Royal Guard." He turned to look at her. The hollowness was still there, but there was something else now, a cold, dangerous clarity. "The dark does not care about your fleet, Princess. It brings thermal blades and explosive charges. It digs patiently under the walls. I had to become it to survive." He walked to the glass table where Valerie had left the daily secure datapad and tossed it to her. "Read the third file." Valerie swiped the screen. Her blood ran cold. A heavily armed royal supply convoy had been hit in the outer rim. No survivors. The cargo was not stolen. The ships were simply disabled, and the crew meticulously, systematically dismantled. "They left the cargo," Valerie whispered, horrified. "It is not a raid," Cole said, walking toward the dark closet where he slept. "It is a deliberate message. From the syndicate." He stopped in the doorway and turned back, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face. He did not look like a broken victim anymore. He looked exactly like the monster he had built in the courtyard of Grimstone. 32, he said quietly. "They sent 35. I killed 32. There are 3 wraiths left, Valerie, and they know I am alive." He stepped into the dark closet, vanishing into the shadows. Garrison stood at the head of the obsidian table, projecting a holographic map of the outer rim. "The convoy attack was a tragedy, Your Highness. A brutal pirate raid, nothing more." Valerie stared at the hologram. "Pirates steal cargo, Garrison. They do not leave 3 million credits worth of refined palladium sitting in the void. They slaughtered 50 royal guards, systematically. That is wraith work." Garrison sighed. "With respect, Princess, you are letting the human's paranoia infect your judgment. He sees assassins in the shadows. It is a tragedy of his condition, but it is not reality." Valerie stood up. "The reality is that 3 wraiths survived Grimstone, and they are hunting." She left without waiting for a dismissal and walked back to the West Wing. The guards outside her suite saluted, but their eyes held a flicker of unease. She keyed the door. The suite was dark, the only light the scattered blue glow of dismantled data pads. Cole? He dropped from the ceiling. Valerie gasped, stumbling backward. Cole landed soundlessly in a crouch, a length of sharpened plasteel gripped in his hand. He had wedged himself between the ceiling beams, waiting. "You walk too heavy," Cole said, sliding the shank into a sheath fashioned from curtain ties. "You lead with your heel. It echoes." She looked around. The antique chairs had been broken down, the metal springs stripped from the couch. He was building an armory out of a luxury suite. "Can they get in here? Into the spire?" Cole picked up a small, heavy ball bearing. "The spire has 300 floors, 40 ventilation shafts, and a perimeter guard that operates on a predictable schedule. They are already inside the city, Valerie. They know you brought me back. That is an insult to their guild. A human surviving their gauntlet is bad for business. You protecting me makes it worse." He looked at her, the hollowness replaced by a terrible, focused intensity. "They will come for you first, to draw me out, or to punish me. I have 50 armed men outside this door. 50 men who have never fought a wraith." Cole turned back to his table. 50 targets. Cole spent the next week mapping the spire's blind spots, using the secure pad Valerie provided. He didn't look at the reinforced doors, or the guarded elevators. He looked at the forgotten spaces, the maintenance crawlways, the high-voltage conduits, the paths a creature of shadows would take. He found the breach point on the 82nd floor, an obsolete atmospheric scrubber sealed behind a decorative bulkhead, leading straight into the primary ventilation artery. He did not tell Valerie or Garrison. They would send guards, make noise, scare the wraiths into a new approach. Cole wanted them to come. The phantom threat had kept him awake for 6 months. He needed the fight to anchor himself back to the world. He was a weapon that had been left loaded for too long. He spent the night preparing. He did not use standard explosives. They would trigger the internal dampeners. He used physics. He wired the heavy decorative chandelier to a trip release. He shattered the reinforced bathroom mirror, grinding the shards into a fine, deadly dust that he packed into the air vents above the door. Valerie watched from the doorway. The fear that had paralyzed him was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying purpose. Then he pulled out his armor, not the ceremonial armor of the Royal Guard, but the black stealth-weave chest plates he had taken off the dead wraiths on Grimstone. He strapped them on, picked up the heavy plasma repeater, and looked at Valerie. "Lock yourself in the panic room. Do not come out until I tell you." "Cole." "Now, Valerie." It was not a request. She looked at the human standing in the middle of her ruined suite, strapped in alien armor, waiting for the dark. She walked into the panic room, the heavy door sealed shut. Cole turned off the lights. The suite plunged into absolute darkness. He sat cross-legged in the center of the room, the heavy plasma repeater across his lap, and closed his eyes. He listened, the hum of city traffic, the thrum of atmospheric scrubbers, the muffled footsteps of guards pacing outside, and then, 2 hours past midnight, he heard it, a sound that did not belong, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape of metal on metal, coming from the ventilation shaft above the grand entrance. Cole opened his eyes. They were here. The ventilation grill did not fall. It was carefully, silently removed and set aside on the carpet. 3 shadows dropped into the room without a sound, shifting translucent distortions in the dim light, moving with terrifying, synchronized fluidity. No hand signals, no words. The lead wraith swept the room with a thermal scanner. The suite appeared empty, the panic room red as a solid block of cold steel. But the wraith was not looking for the princess. Not yet. It was looking for the human. Cole did not move. He had anticipated the thermal scan. He had spent the last 2 hours sitting directly beneath a coolant pipe he had intentionally snapped, frigid chemical gas pooling around him, masking his body heat. He was just another cold spot in a ruined room. The wraiths fanned out. The leader moved toward the center, right toward Cole. He let the leader take 3 steps, 4, 5. When the wraith was exactly 3 feet away, Cole triggered the trip release hidden under the carpet. Above them, the massive crystal chandelier detached from the ceiling. It weighed 400 pounds. The leader looked up a fraction of a second too late. It crashed down, pinning the lead wraith to the floor with a sickening crunch of breaking bones. The other 2 spun toward the center of the room, thermal blades igniting with a lethal hiss. Cole was already moving. He rolled out of the coolant pool and fired blind into the shifting distortion nearest the panic room. The wraith twisted in unnatural evasion, then closed the distance in a heartbeat, its thermal blade sweeping at Cole's neck. Cole dropped the repeater, too clumsy for close quarters, and ducked under the glowing blade, driving his shoulder into the wraith's chest plate. It was like hitting a wall. The wraith brought the pommel of its blade down onto Cole's back. He fell hard, then rolled as the blade stabbed down, melting a hole through the floorboards where his head had been. He kicked out, connecting with the wraith's knee joint. It buckled. The wraith hissed and stumbled. Cole scrambled up and pulled the sharpened plasteel shank from its sheath. The third wraith flanked him. Cole pulled a handful of crushed mirror glass from his pocket and hurled it into its visor. The abrasive dust coated the optical sensors, and the wraith flinched, blinded. Cole pivoted back to the second wraith, the one with the damaged knee, which lunged. Cole didn't dodge. He stepped inside the guard, letting the thermal blade score a burning trench across his chest armor, and drove the plasteel shank upward into the unarmored gap under the wraith's chin. It punched through into the cranial cavity. The wraith froze and collapsed, 2 down. Cole turned. The third wraith had wiped its visor clear. It deactivated its thermal blade and reached to its hip, drawing a heavy kinetic slug thrower, a gun. Wraiths considered firearms crude tools for the unrefined. Drawing one meant the human was no longer a target to be assassinated. He was an extermination protocol. Cole was out in the open, his repeater on the floor 10 feet away, nothing but a bloody shank in hand. The wraith raised the weapon. Cole didn't dive for cover. He stood his ground and stared down the dark barrel. He was back in the bunker on Grimstone. He was out of ammo. He was ready. The heavy reinforced door of the panic room suddenly blew open with a deafening screech. The wraith whipped around, startled. Valerie stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her royal silks. She wore the heavy blast-resistant security rig, stored inside the safe room. And she was holding a massive triple-barreled riot shotgun. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The roar was deafening. A cloud of tungsten buckshot tore across the room and hit the wraith center mass, lifting the heavy alien off its feet and slamming it against the far wall. It slid down, leaving a smear of luminescent blue blood, and did not move. Silence descended. The only sound was the hiss of the ruptured coolant pipe and the ragged breathing of the 2 survivors. Cole stared at the dead assassin. He stared at the shotgun. He stared at the princess. Valerie lowered the weapon, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Cole's chest armor was melted and smoking. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts. He looked like a monster, but his eyes were clear. The hollow void was gone. "You came out of the room," Cole rasped. Valerie stepped over the wreckage and walked up to him, not caring about the blood or the smell of burning synthetics. "I told you," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am never leaving you behind again." Cole looked at her. He looked at the mountain of broken furniture and dead assassins. The ledger was finally closed. The math was balanced. 35 wraiths sent, 35 wraiths dead. He let out a long, shuddering breath and dropped the bloody shank. "Okay," Cole said quietly. "Okay." The door to the corridor burst open. Hayes and 20 guards flooded in, sweeping their rifles across the carnage. They stopped dead, staring in shock at the destroyed suite and the dead elite assassins. Hayes lowered his rifle, looking from the dead wraiths to the princess holding a shotgun, and finally to the human standing in the center of the wreckage. "Princess," Hayes stammered. "What happened here?" Valerie handed the empty shotgun to a stunned guard and stood tall. She looked at Garrison, who had just pushed his way through, his face pale with terror. "The inspection is over, Garrison," Valerie said coldly. "Call the cleaning crew. We have a mess to pick up." She turned back to Cole and grasped his scarred, bloodied hand. "And get a medic. My escort needs a patch job." Cole looked down at her hand holding his. He didn't pull away. For the first time in 6 months, the phantom threat was silent. The dark was just the dark. And he wasn't alone in it anymore. Garrison was sweating. The polished veneer of the chief royal advisor cracked as he stared at the luminescent blue blood soaking into the priceless carpets. "This is an act of war. The syndicate has violated the capital treaties. We have to evacuate the royal family to the fleet." "No," Valerie said, stepping over a shattered piece of the chandelier. "We are not running. Princess, if the High Council finds out a syndicate kill team bypassed our defense grid, It will cause mass panic. They are going to find out, Valerie interrupted, walking right up to Garrison and invading his space. She was a full head shorter, but in that moment, she felt massive. Because I am going to show them. I want these bodies kept on ice, preserved perfectly. Preserved for what reason? For the summit tomorrow. The High Council chamber was a massive amphitheater of white marble and gold trim. Representatives from 12 allied star systems sat in elevated gravity pods, arguing over minor trade tariffs, detached from the violent realities of the outer rim. The reinforced doors slammed open, silencing the room. Valerie walked in. She wore her immaculate royal silks, but over them she wore the scorched black chestplate of a dead wraith, a grotesque breach of protocol. Behind her, 4 guards wheeled in a gravlift pallet bearing 3 unzipped body bags, exposing the dead armored assassins for the entire council. And behind the pallet walked Cole, his kinetic slug thrower slung across his chest, his eyes on the shadows in the high rafters. The avian representative of the Cygnus system stood, feathers bristling. What is the meaning of this? You bring corpses into the sacred chamber. This is an outrage. Valerie walked to the center podium. These are syndicate wraiths, she announced, her voice leaving no room for debate. They breached the high spire last night. They bypassed our orbital blockade, our planetary scanners, and our elite guard. They came to finish the assassination job they started on Grimstone 6 months ago. The room erupted. Garrison buried his face in his hands. Valerie slammed her fist on the podium. Silence. The council froze. The heir to the throne had never raised her voice in this room before. You sit here and debate minor tariffs while the syndicate treats our empire like a hunting ground. You told me the attack on Grimstone was an anomaly. You told me the slaughtered convoy was a pirate raid. You lied to yourselves because you are terrified of the dark. She pointed at the bodies. The dark was in my bedroom last night. An older, silicon-based council member leaned forward. If the wraiths breached your inner sanctum, princess, how are you alive? Valerie looked back at Cole, leaning against a marble pillar. Because of him, a human, a mercenary you consider biologically expendable. He didn't run. He didn't hide behind treaties. He stayed. He fought. He bled. And he killed them. The council stared at the human. They had seen humanity working the docks, digging the mines, dying on the front lines. But they had never seen one stand in the sacred chamber, perfectly calm, having slaughtered 3 of the galaxy's most feared killers. She tapped a command into the console. A massive holographic projection of the Grimstone courtyard sprang to life, showing the mountain of shattered armor and bodies. 32 wraiths died on Grimstone. 3 died in my quarters. The Syndicate's elite guild is broken, and they know it. We are drafting a formal declaration of war. We will root out their shadow networks. We will hunt them down. Princess, this is madness, Garrison yelled from his box. You cannot declare war on an invisible enemy. We do not have the capabilities to fight an assassination guild. Valerie smiled, a cold smile she had learned from a man who survived on rusty water and pure spite. We don't need capabilities, Garrison. We just need a new contract. She turned to Cole. The Empire is hiring. Do you want the job? Cole looked at her, then at the room full of terrified politicians, and rolled his injured shoulder. My rates just went up. The declaration of war shifted the galactic balance of power. For centuries, the Syndicate had operated as a tolerated evil, ignored because they were too difficult to eradicate. Valerie changed the rules. She didn't fight them in the shadows. She dragged them into the light. The next 3 months were a brutal, coordinated offensive. The Empire didn't send clumsy fleets to bombard planets. They sent surgical kill teams, trained personally by Cole. He taught them to build improvised explosives from mining equipment, to mask their thermal signatures with coolant and mud. That survival wasn't about honor, but about geometry, and an absolute refusal to die. Valerie watched the training from the observation deck. She had changed. The expensive silks were gone, replaced by practical military fatigues. The naive princess who had boarded that escape pod was dead. In her place stood a hardened sovereign. Later that evening, she found Cole alone on the roof of the barracks, oiling his kinetic slug thrower, the sky a deep, bruised purple streaked with the contrails of departing transports. The Syndicate is fracturing, Valerie said, sitting down beside him. Their leadership is turning on each other. The assassinations across the core worlds have stopped. Cole racked the slide. They haven't stopped. They are regrouping. Cornered animals always bite hardest right before they bleed out. His face was relaxed, though. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. He was sleeping through the night now. The phantom threat had been replaced by a tangible enemy. He had a purpose. You know you can leave, right? Valerie asked softly. The bounty the council paid you is enough to buy your own private moon. You could go back to Earth. See your sister in Chicago. Cole set the pistol down and looked out over the glowing city. My sister used the first payout to open a bakery, he said, his lips twitching in something close to a smile. She doesn't have to look over her shoulder anymore. She is safe. That is good. But I don't belong in a bakery, Valerie. I spent 6 months learning how to be a monster in the dark. Turns out I'm pretty good at it. You are not a monster, Valerie said firmly. I am. And that's fine. Because this empire needs a monster to guard the gates. The Syndicate isn't the only dark thing out there. There are worse things waiting in the void. He reached into his pocket and tossed her a small metallic object. Valerie caught it. A heavy silver medallion, the emblem of the Royal Guard stamped on the front, but a jagged, crude scratch cut across the crest, defacing it. What is this? A new contract, Cole said, looking back at the sky. Exclusive retainer. You point, I shoot. It was a promise. A binding agreement between a broken human soldier and a hardened alien princess. They were different species, separated by light years of culture and biology, but they had been forged in the same fire on a dead moon. She closed her hand tightly around the metal. 200 credits a cycle. Cole actually smiled, a real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, plus hazard pay. They sat together on the roof as the artificial sun dipped below the horizon, but the darkness didn't feel heavy anymore. The dark was just the place where they kept their weapons, and the violent ghosts of Grimstone were finally at rest. If you love this story of humanity surviving against impossible odds, and showing the galaxy why you never leave a human behind, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Would you have hired Cole to train your army, or taken the money and retired to Earth? Let me know in the comments below. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another HFY epic. See you in the next one.